People who've gotten their bosses fired. How? He grabbed the back of my neck and said, "If you ever say I'm wrong in front of a customer again, I will beat your ass." I went to the GM and told him, and my supervisor was relieved of his duties about 5 minutes later. The CEO publicly praised me for completing a task that my boss had struggled with, so my boss retaliated by forwarding all of his tasks to me in an effort to overwhelm me with work. I actually found his job pretty manageable, which the CEO also noticed and fired him, giving me his job and office. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff, they corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras, saw he was spending most of his work day outside smoking, and was fired. When he was told, he guessed, wasn't hard, that I was the person who complained and tried to get to me to apologize. The best feeling was my co-workers surrounding me as he was wailed out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the fuck off the ice. Some dickhead decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said I feel okay, then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation, paper trail in case, God forbid, I ended up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. I was fired because I abandoned my job while on short-term disability, because while on approved leave, they are a date for me to return, never informed me, by their own admission, and when I obviously didn't return to work, I was fired. The locker I had at work had my work boots in it that the company pays $90 a year towards. However, there isn't a pair under $100 available, so you always end up having some come out of your paycheck. At that point, they are yours regardless of the company line. They disagreed and said they were thrown out. I reported them stolen, and the HR director responsible for getting me fired was fired. I took a cell phone video of her taking money from the safe and putting it in her wallet. I knew she was doing it, and I also knew that the moment it came out that money was missing, she'd blame it on me. She was so stupid that she didn't realize she should stop doing that while I was standing 10 feet away with my phone out and facing her. Phoned him to tell him I won't be at work for the rest of the week as my mom is terminally ill in hospital. The next day, about an hour after she passed away, he phoned and asked why I wasn't at work. I just hung up on him so I wouldn't say anything that would get me in trouble. The next day I sent the area manager a WhatsApp message explaining what he'd be done and attached a video of him breaking the freezer door while having a tantrum which cost the store nearly £5,000 in lost stock and the repair costs, which he told the AM it broke on its own. He got fired that day and I got 2 weeks off with full pay. About 13 to 14 years ago, I was working as a web designer for a .com. In our immediate group were a creative director, a creative manager, and 2 of us who were designers, and we were all part of the marketing department. The creative director was a joke. Brought in by the previous VP of marketing who he was friends with, he hardly did any work himself, and just played online poker waiting on us to send him things for approval. And he'd never stick around late when the rest of us needed to stay late to hit a deadline or deal with a crisis, etc. The creative manager, who'd been in charge for a couple years before the creative director's hiring, still ran the day-to-day. So the creative manager gave his notice that he'd accepted a new job, and when I met with the current VP of marketing to discuss transition, I mentioned that the creative director would need to step up and pull his weight. I guess a similar message was expressed by a number of people, and less than a week after the creative manager's last day, the creative director was fired. This kind of sucked because we went down from 4 to 2 people in our group. I was appointed acting creative manager, and we eventually did hire one more designer. I left the company a couple months later, 2, after the latest VP of marketing was let go, and there was going to be a 10th different person overseeing marketing in my 5 years there. And the a-hole creative director? He'd reached out at some point, looking for files for his portfolio, I think, and it happened to be in the 2-week window where I'd accepted my next job but hadn't yet started, so I mentioned my new position. Well, he fires off a copy of his resume to the company president and tried to poach my new job out from under me. On my first day at the new job, the president mentioned that somebody else from that same company also applied for the job and forwarded me the application email to see if I knew him. Saw that the date was after he and I had last communicated. Not my boss, but I helped my friend get her boss fired. He was a general manager, and always grabbing her sides, purposely scheduling her to have shifts alone with him, asking her to sleep with him, etc. She reported it so many times to the owner, big boss, and they said they couldn't do anything because they hadn't seen it, and had no their reports other than her account. So I called and complained as a customer about how I witnessed him being creepy to her, and how it made me uncomfortable. For the most part true lol, I just don't shop there. My manager wanted to prove I'm slacking off so he could write me up. So he watched CCTV footages, then wrote, printed out and signed a detailed 17 pages worth of Word document what did I do in the past 2 days. With timestamps like 7:59 arriving, 8:01 speaking with coworker A and B, 8:07 sitting down to my desk, etc. He told me that he's not happy with my work ethics if I won't improve my efficiency. I'm forward. I took the papers and showed to his boss and told her that I'm not happy with my manager's work ethics and his efficiency might be better if he wouldn't watch 17 hours of CCTV footages to spy on an employee. She was terrified. It would have been a rock-solid lawsuit for me, but I love my job, and we had to search for a new manager. Also, my salary raised. I took a phone call on my cell when at my desk. Middle manager came up and screamed at me, yelling about how I was not allowed to take calls for clients while at that office. I was a contractor and made it perfectly clear that I did work for multiple clients prior to doing work for this company. The CTO's office was 10 feet from mine. He came out and stood in his doorway listening to the rant. When the middle manager was done, I just looked over at the CTO and said, "It's him or me, and at the moment I don't give a fuck which you pick." CTO walked the middle manager out right then. Funny thing, I didn't hang up throughout the incident. And it was my wife on the other end. I was spending about 70 hours a week at their site digging their staff out of a hole they had dug themselves in. I left my last company due to a bully of a GM. Many people were leaving over him, causing problems, being sexist, racist, doing things people could easily sue them for claiming sexual harassment. List goes on. Everyone informed HR during their exit interviews. Hell, he even tried to make my exit interview not happen, though they still weren't doing anything. I had been at my new job for a couple months now and was still getting complaints from my old team almost daily. So I made an email account and named concerned company name crew. Sent an email to everyone who had an email account within the company explaining what he did or still did with events spanning from his start to the day prior. They fired him within the week and my old crew thanked me. Basically said, "I'm quitting because of X." Boss looked at me and said, "Can I convince you to delay this by a week?" Worked from home for a week, then she, X, was gone. Worked there for 5 more years, then 7 at the company that acquired us. Our desks were separated by a 5-foot cubicle wall. He was under the mistaken impression that it totally blocked sound. Thus I got to hear all his loud phone conversations, primarily his booty calls including those with his boss's fiancée. I figured it was none of my business and tried to ignore it. Well, there was a position in another department that I was interested in, and as per procedure I handed in an application to my talkative boss. Didn't hear anything further and followed up a couple of days later, only to be told that something must have happened to the application. Filled out another one and handed it in. As I returned to my desk, I hear the boss on the phone with a friend laughing about how he had just trashed my application again, and how he was never going to let go of me. I go to boss's boss and angrily offer my resignation, telling him what I had just overheard, explaining that I was constantly hearing his phone calls like his booty calls like with an end. He got very quiet and told me to go back to my desk and he'll take care of everything. The next day I come in and boss is gone. The day after, I have an interview with the other department, got the position. One summer I volunteered to help a conservation society in East Africa. The aim of the project was to educate the local rural population about poaching and to get them to help us stop it from the ground up. Anyway, I was staying with the lead ranger and his family, and on numerous occasions he served us meat that a male 100% sure was poached. He tried to tell me that it was pork, but it was dark and gamey with lots of small bones. I think that it was small antelope like dik-dik or diker. When I returned to Nairobi, I mentioned to my grandpa, his boss's boss, that we'd eaten some odd meals. He investigated, and found out that my boss had a poacher friend who was selling him illegal meat. He was fired. I didn't feel guilty. Poaching is awful. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.